Friend. So we've got the events. Tonight, we catch up to the story of Joseph. And before we get started tonight, I want to give a teaser for next week. Miss Betty hit me up while we were at the outside movie thing that we did, and she said, Chad, have you ever thought about teaching on a topical subject? And I said, I really hadn't done that a whole lot before. And I became inspired by her question. And the question that hit me that I became intrigued by, and I've been really intrigued because of the Chosen series that we watched. There's a specific scene inside the Chosen series where Nicodemus meets Jesus on a rooftop, and it's John 3. And so I became intrigued by that whole process, and I started reading John 3, and as I read John 3, I realized I really had never read John 3 to the depth that we've studied Scripture together. And I started asking myself, what does salvation actually look like biblically? And then what does being born again look like biblically? And when I say biblically, I mean, where did it come from? How did culturally it get viewed? What was the process of how they thought that salvation should happen? Why did the Pharisees think about it this way? Why did the Sadducees think about it this way? And what in the world did Jesus do with it with Nicodemus at that meeting that night whenever he saw Jesus? So next week, we will start what will probably take 2 to 3 studies together of just going over the chapter of John chapter 3. We will go all the way to the Old Testament. We will go forward into the New Testament, into Revelations. We will hang out in John chapter 3 and go through all kind of word studies together. I will actually have printouts for you where I'll have you circling and coloring because there's no other way you can comprehend what we're about to go through unless you do it that way. But I'm telling you, you don't need to bring colored pencils. We can do it without colored pencils. The colorblind guy will not require colored pencils. But next week, I will make sure also for those online that we have a link to the documents that I'm going to post so that you can download and print those yourself, and then you can go through, because I'm literally going to, it's so complex that if we don't get into it, you're going to miss it. So we're going to take some time next week. So that's enough for next week. It's going to be 2 or 3 lessons. I'm like super pumped because I have learned so much, and I'm just like, I can't wait to share it. So we're in the life of Joseph, though, tonight, finishing in Genesis 44. We've got to back up. I forgot to go through that one chapter, so we're going to go back and catch that chapter tonight, and then we're going to jump ahead to 49 and 50 and finish. But we're in the life of Joseph. We're at the point that Joseph has met his brothers, and we're at the point that Joseph is also about to see his dad. And in chapter 44, if you're in the app, chapter 44, and just so in case anybody wonders, I've been using the original Bibles that I gave out, if you were part of the men's Bible study, were NASB Bibles. I have been studying out of the Lexham English version lately, Lexham English Bible, and it has been phenomenally well done. It's hard to read, but it's so close to the literal language. So if you're like, Chad, what version are you using? I'm using the Lexham English Bible, and that's what's on your Bible Events, by the way, app. Okay, just in case you're wondering, like, Chad, why is it so different? Chapter 44, verse 1. We're speaking about Joseph here. Then he commanded the one who was over his household, Joseph told the commander of his household, fill the sacks of the men, his brothers, with the food as much as they are able to carry. So they've got these donkeys and these animals and these livestock that they've moved with, and put each one's money in the mouth of his sack, and my cup, the cup of silver, which, how do we know that what is one of the practices of the Egyptians to practice divination? What would they do inside a cup? Do y'all recall? Inside a cup, what you would do is you would take a cup filled with water and you would drop oil in it. And so to divinate what was going on in the Egyptian culture, one of the practices was you would watch how the oil moved in the cup. Not motor oil, y'all, like olive oil. Just to make sure the rednecks in the room were like, really? Did he use castor or Pennzoil? I knew exactly what you were thinking, Albert. And my cup, the cup of silver, you shall put in the mouth of the sack of the youngest. Who is the youngest brother? Benjamin. Remember, by the way, Benjamin's name was not actually Benjamin when he was born. It was Ben-Hur, and it was the son of my pain. And then like we know, unfortunately, the good daddy, and I say that sarcastically, that Jacob was, whenever Benjamin was born, he changed his name after Rachel died to Benjamin. And so Joseph says, put the cup in the youngest boy Benjamin's sack and the money for his grain as well. And he did according to the word of Joseph that he had commanded, his household steward. When the morning light came, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. So they got these animals that they've got these sacks on, and they went out of the city and had not gone far when Joseph said to the one who was over his house, arise, pursue after the men and overtake them. It's like he's messing with them. You get that imagery? Then you shall say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is this not that from which my master drinks? The cup of divination? The sacred chalice is what we would think of it almost as. Is this not that from which my master drinks? Now he himself certainly practices divination with it. You have done evil in what you have done. Now, I want to stop for just a second. We have been raised that Joseph, whenever we think about going to Sunday school and the felt boards and the dentist office books and the coat of many colors, the coat of many colors, was it short sleeve or long sleeve? Long sleeve. It was a long sleeve coat of many colors. So here he is with a long sleeve coat of many colors, and we think, oh, this is like the ultimate Christian is what we think about for some reason. For some reason, we've just grown up with that image in our mind and think Joseph is like the ultimate Christian. What did it just say he was doing in the cup? Divinating. You think, hold on one second. Joseph's been away from his daddy, Jacob, for 30 plus years, right? And he's been in a culture that has practiced all these occultic, God-worshiping practices. And we realize, Joseph's adopted some of those practices. And who was he married to? The priest's daughter. So you think for a second, oh, hold on. Joseph is married to an Egyptian priest's daughter. Wouldn't it just make practice? You just can't help but now realize, you're like, oh. The image I had of Joseph is a little bit different than what I grew up with, right? And he says, verse 6, when he overtook them, the servant of Joseph, he spoke these words to them. And they said to him, why has my Lord spoken according to these words? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. They were in denial of it because he hid the cup underneath Benjamin's grain. Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money we found in the mouth of our sacks, we returned to you from the land of Canaan. Now, why would we steal silver or gold from you, from the house of my Lord, a second time? You get that? Whoever is found with it from among your servants shall die. And moreover, we will become slaves to my Lord. Then he said, now also according to your words, this will it be. He who is found with it shall be my slave, but you shall be innocent. So you can imagine he opens the sacks on the sides of the donkeys that's carrying the grain, and he runs his hand down, and you know he deliberately doesn't go straight to Benjamin's sack first, right? He probably goes to Simeon's sack because Simeon's been the one that's been in jail, right? Remember, he was the one that had been in jail? And so Simeon's thinking, oh, Lord, I don't want to go back to jail in Egypt, in Pharaoh's house. And so he runs over to Benjamin's sack, and he probably sticks his hand down in the grain, and he feels around, and he pulls out the chalice. And can you imagine on Benjamin and on everybody's face? Because if Benjamin doesn't come home, what happens? Well, Judah specifically dies, right? Because Judah pledged his life for Benjamin's. Yes, and then his dad's going to die because he says, Jacob says, if Benjamin doesn't come back, it'll not only be that Joseph's dead because of the bloody goat garment, but also now I'm just going to die of grieving of heart, this manipulative old man. And so then each man quickly brought down his sack to the ground, and each one opened his sack, and he searched, beginning with the oldest and finished with the youngest, and the cup was found in the sack of Benjamin. Then they tore their clothes because they knew it was bad, right? In Jewish culture, we tear our clothes in mourning. You know, I can't believe this is happening, and they rent their clothes. And he searched, beginning with the oldest, 13. Then he tore their clothes. Each one loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. Can you imagine for just 1 second what it must have been like for those brothers who don't get along to be following? Because Did the head of Joseph's household most likely travel by himself to go get these brothers? No. He probably had an Egyptian guard with him because he's going to be traveling outside the palace compounds. And so he's traveling with a guard, and they now are being walked back toward the palace. I've never really considered that until we've read this story together, is the impact of those 11 brothers walking back with one another and just thinking, what in the world have we done? Benjamin, why did you do this? You think they've got to be blaming Benjamin, right? It's in his bag.
All their money is in their bags, right?
That's right. So they've got to be thinking, what is going on? And it happened last time. Why is it happening now? And then they tore their clothes. And Judah and his brothers came to the household of Joseph. Now he was still there, and they fell before him to the ground. And then Joseph said to them, "What is this deed that you have done? Did you not know that a man who is like me surely practices divination?" Isn't that interesting again? I mean, he acknowledges, this man of the Bible acknowledges that he practiced divination himself. And then verse 16, and Judah said, "What can we say to my Lord? What can we speak?" In other words, I don't know what else to say about this. Now, how can we show ourselves innocent? God has found the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are slaves to my Lord, both we and also he who is in the hand the cup was found. But he said, "Far be it from me to do this. The man whose hand the cup was found, he will become my slave." This is Joseph speaking. Who's going to become his slave? Why did he want Benjamin to become his slave? He's his only blood brother, right? Straight blood brother. And he doesn't trust him with any of his 10 other brothers, right? But maybe they'll do something that's right. Maybe, Andrew, they'll do something to him too. And so, verse 18, but Judah drew near to him and said, he comes close to him. He still doesn't know who he is. "Please, my Lord, let your servant speak a word in the ears of my Lord, and let not your anger burn." Please don't get upset against your servant. "For you are like Pharaoh himself," buttering him up, right? I mean, "my Lord has asked his servant, saying, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we said to my Lord, 'We have an aged father and a younger brother, the child of his old age, and his brother died.'" What did he just do? He lied. Isn't that interesting? We know he lied to Joseph, and he doesn't even realize he's telling a lie. And he alone remains from his mother, and his father loves him, Benjamin. "Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes upon him.' Then we said to my Lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves his father, then he would die. Jacob would die.'" 23, "Then you said to your servants, 'Unless your younger brother comes down with you, you shall not again see my face.'" At this point, Joseph's got to be like, "You lying? Just hush. Just stop talking." "And it happened that we went up to your servant, my father, and told him the words of my Lord." And verse 25, "And when our father said, 'Go back, buy a little food for us,' then we said, 'We cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we shall go down. For we will not be able to see the face of the man unless our youngest brother is with us." Who is in prison? Simeon. Do you notice Simeon doesn't ever get referenced here? What did poor old Simeon do to be hated so badly? You see that? And you got to be asking yourself, well, Simeon's thinking, "You left me here, you dirtbag. And then you went off, and now you come back. And you didn't come back to get me. You came back because Daddy ran out of food." Did you see that?
It seems like they would do it to any of them, though.
It does. They are cutthroat.
They don't like Joseph. They don't like Jacob because he was the favorite.
That's right. They didn't like Jacob at all because he was the favorite. And then verse 27, "Then your servant, my father, said to us, 'You yourselves know that my wife bore 2 sons to me.'" He didn't talk about his other 3 wives. You notice that? Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah. He didn't mention them. "One went out from me, and I said, 'Surely he must have been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since.'" He's saying that to the man who was, quote, torn to pieces. 29, "And if you take this one from me, and he encounters harm, you will bring down my gray head in sorrow to Sheol." Now, is Sheol not what? Sheol is not hell. Sheol, in the understanding of the ancient Hebrews, was what place? Like what? Like purgatory in the Catholic sense. It's underneath the earth. If the earth is, the Eretz is the flat land that humans exist on, Sheol exists somewhere under the earth that is like a holding place for souls, is the essential equivalent that we get from the Hebrew Scriptures. So verse 30, so now when I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, now his life is bound up with his life. It shall happen that when he sees that the boy is gone, he will die. Jacob will die. And your servant will bring down the gray head of your servant, our father, to Sheol with sorrow. For your servant is pledged as surety. Who's talking? Judah is talking to Joseph. Boy, my father saying, if I do not bring him to you, then I shall be culpable to my father forever. So then, please let your servant remain in place of the boy as a slave to my Lord. I'll give my life for his if you'll just let me go. And let the boy go up with his brothers. For how can I go up to my father if the boy is not with me? The misery which will find my father. So, what we know happens is that this breaks Joseph down. To catch us up between 45 and 48 that we studied last week, we know that this breaks Joseph to his knees emotionally. He begins to weep on his brother's neck. And all those things, remember that? He weeps on Benjamin and he says, go get daddy. You know, go get Jacob. And Pharaoh says, go get Jacob and bring him. Why did Pharaoh tell Joseph to go get Jacob? Because that's right, because Joseph is the goose that laid the golden egg for Egypt. You know, without Joseph, Egypt would be in a famine state that was completely irreparable from the standpoint of the population being able to survive. And we see that the Egyptian government actually sold the grain to the Egyptian people, so much so that what ended up happening to the Egyptian people when they ran out of money? They sold themselves, they sold their families, they sold their land, they sold everything they had just for food, and they completely indebted themselves to the Egyptian government for the remaining grain that was to be had. Isn't that interesting? We look at our culture today, not a rabbit trail here, but we talk about Genesis as a constant cycle, right? Coming through, a cycle coming through. When Lebanon had the bomb go off in Beirut, and I call it a bomb because that's essentially what all that nitrate turned into, right? What did it do to the food supply of that country? It devastated 85% of the grain in that country was at that harbor. And they're already in a huge political issue. And today it was announced that their government, most of their prime minister and others had stepped aside. So think about history replaying itself. What ultimately might happen if things don't correct itself in Lebanon, as an example. The people will become indebted for food. And it's just a cycle over and over and over again, right? So, since this time, the people of Israel have settled in the land of Goshen, and the famine continues in Egypt as well. And now we're at chapter 49. Then Jacob called his sons. They've moved. Remember, the Hebrews have moved from Canaan. And they have all come. There was a specific number of people, and it was important. 70 people had come, and the whole family. Where had they stopped on their way? They were caravanning to Egypt for a camping trip, and on the way to go to camp in Egypt, they stopped at where? That's part of the city, but it's originally called Beersheba. They stopped at Beersheba, and what was in Beersheba that was so important to stop at? The altar. The altar. Remember the original altar. If we went back all the way and we traced it back to Abraham, remember Abraham and Philcah and the other guy that came from the Philistines? They actually made a bargain there. And that's all the way back in Genesis. We studied that together. So they stop in Beersheba, and they land up in Goshen. And now this is where we're interacting, is that they have been in Goshen for a little while now, the land of Goshen. Remember, up near the Nile Delta at the top, the north. Then Jacob, yes?
I think you, I don't know, I think you
Did I really?
You guys get that?
Did I stop at 16? Let me transition over.
We talked about the hand, like he switched them. Did we talk about that?
We did. We talked, but I don't know if we went into the detail. Thank you, Candy.
Verse 16.
I think you mentioned it, but then we didn't finish it.
I think that is what happened. Let me, we're going to go off. I'm going to have to go to the Bible app just straight. It's not in the notes. And we're going to start from 16. Thank you, Candy. 48:16. Is that what you had? 48. Yeah, we're going to need to start at 7. We're going to start at 17 because it was a switching of the hands. So chapter 48, verse 17. When Joseph saw that his father put his right hand on the head of Ephraim, Ephraim was the youngest son, he was displeased. And he took his daddy's old hand and moved it from the head of Ephraim to the Manasseh. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, because this one is the firstborn. Put your hand upon his head, on Manasseh." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, what I'm doing. Leave me alone. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But his younger brother shall be greater than him, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." Who had Jacob blessed in that way before as well? His dad. Right. Abraham had blessed Jacob in that way, and then God had told Jacob in a dream that the other 12 would bow down, and he was the younger brother. Remember that? And so he blessed them that day, saying, "Though you, Israel, shall pronounce blessing, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and like Manasseh." So he put Ephraim before Manasseh, and Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your ancestors. And I have given to you one slope of land rather than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorites by my sword and with my bow." So the choice land. You got that? Again, to the very end, Jacob plays favorites to Joseph and says, "This is going to be the best. You're going to get some of the best." All right, so let's go now to 49, verse 1, back in our Bible app. So they're sitting there, and he's just blessed him. Then Jacob called his sons and said, he calls the other sons because who's with him? Joseph and the 2 babies, okay? Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together so that I can tell you what will happen with you in days to come." And if Jacob's my daddy at this point, I'm like, "Hey, Dad, I got to go take care of the sheep real quick. I don't want to hear from you what's going to happen to any of us." You know, he's that kind of dad. You're like, "No, I appreciate it, Dad, but no thanks." "Assemble and hear, O sons of Jacob. Listen to you, Israel, your father." And I can imagine this in my grandfather's voice when he was very elderly. My grandfather's name was Ponto. I can hear Ponto speaking this in his old raspy old man voice. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, and the first fruits of my vigor." Thank you, Jacob. More than we needed to know there. "Excelling in rank and excelling in power. But look at what's wrong with you, Reuben. You're as unstable as water. You shall not excel any longer." And at that point, you're like, "Dad, shut up. For you went up upon the bed of your father. You had sex with my wife and defiled it. You went up upon my couch." That, like, seriously, Reuben? There's all these other women, and you went after your dad's wife. Do we see that anywhere else in the Bible? Yes. Over and over again, we see that same sin through the Bible. And you're like going, "Chad, you keep saying these things over and over." Well, it does. We just keep playing through history the same way. Reuben ruined his blessing in future by sexual misconduct. Please, Simeon. Simeon and Levi are brothers. What do we remember about Simeon and Levi? Who was their sister? The one who was attacked, that was raped, Dinah. Dinah, remember? She was raped by the prince as they were coming out of that place. And do what? Near Shechem. And what ended up happening was the brothers said, "We're going to go take care of Dinah because Jacob, you're too big of a sissy to." And they go and they attack a whole village after the whole village of men had been circumcised. And they kill everybody in the village. And Jacob looks at them after they kill everybody. And he's like, what have you done? You created such bad problems for us. And so now, this is the Simeon and Levi. I want you to bring that back to memory. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Is that true? Very much so. Let me not come into their counsel. Do you hear that? Whenever they attacked the prince and the village, or the city, the town that he attacked, they scolded Jacob for not doing anything. And what is Jacob now doing in his old age is he's putting a blessing on them. He's saying, I don't want to hear from y'all in my old age. What you have to say is not really important. Let not my person be joined to their company. I don't even want you as a son anymore. For in their anger they killed men, and at their pleasure they hamstrung cattle. So it wasn't enough that they went in and they killed everybody. For any of the women and children that were left and that were not going to be brought into slave ship underneath the tribe of Jacob, what they did is they went in and deliberately cut the tendons on the back of the cow's legs so that they could not pull a plow. Does that make sense? So they essentially devastated the farming, and they made it to where the children would have to pull the plows, or they would have to push the plows to the ground to do any plowing. That's really cutthroat. That's like salting the land after you conquer it kind of attitude. Alexander the Great kind of thing. And at their pleasure, they hamstrung. They got a kick out of the fact that they hamstrung the animals. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and I will scatter them in Israel. These are the two brothers. Judah, as for you, your brothers shall praise you. Now, who does Judah, we're tracing the red scarlet thread, where does Jesus' lineage come from? Judah, the line of Judah. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. If you're a warlord at this time, which is essentially what we're dealing with, is tribal warlord kind of thing, you have two ways that you typically mistreat other warlords or kings. You stand on their neck with your foot. We see that in the book of Joshua. Whenever Joshua, they say that he stands on his neck and they kill him. Or you can put your hand on the neck, and you got to think like it's. I used to have a 150-pound Saint Bernard, and the guy taught me about dogs. He said, you're going to have to teach that dog who's boss at some point. And he said, what you're going to do is pin that dog, and with your hand, you're going to have to pin that dog to the ground and just bury his neck in the dirt to let him know that you are the alpha male. And you're going to have to bite his ear. And I was like, I got you all the way biting his ear. I'm not biting his ear. But that's the kind of imagery that we see here. And the son of your father shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bowed down, he crouched like a lion, as a lioness, who shall rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff between his feet until Shiloh comes. That's, by the way, a messianic reference specifically. That one line is it's a direct link into the messianic idea of Christ. And to him shall be the obedience of nations, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Before we go further, when you bind a donkey to a vine, it tramples it. Okay, so it's a view of being able to be in lordship and authority over it. Okay, and so if you bind your animal to a vine, it's giving that imagery. And then he says he washes his clothing in wine and his garment in the blood of grapes. In other words, he's got so much money he's swimming in it. That is what that saying is. It's not like there's some stain that comes from that makes it valuable. What he's saying is it's like he's trying to think of a modern day.
Using bottled water in your.
Yes, perfect. Yes, I'm so wealthy. I've got Evian bath water, and I pour it, whatever it is. That's the kind of imagery that we ought to get. The eyes are darker than wine, and the teeth whiter than milk. In other words, he's got good choppers, and he's got good-looking eyes. Zebulun shall settle by the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Here's the interesting thing. If we were to I should have spliced a map in. The land of Zebulun is not by the seashore, by the way. And you're like, what? Did he just get it wrong? Yeah, Jacob got it wrong. The land of Zebulun actually was just north of the Sea of Galilee, and it's in a little pocket. It's a very small structure of land, relatively speaking, that Zebulun was built over, but it's not actually near the seashore. So I don't know how else to say it. It's just what it is. Historically speaking, it didn't matter. Oh, I did splice an image in. If you'll go down one, look at me. Hey, I did this a few days ago, as you can tell. The land of Zebulun is, just see it there to the left of the Sea of Galilee? What color? Magenta, thank you. Purple, I'm told, yes. So, thank you. Yeah, I don't have my colorblind glasses on tonight. And so, verse 14, Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw a resting place that was good and a land that was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to the burden and became a servant of forced labor. Nothing significant that we need to understand there. It just literally is what it is. He just started working hard. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent on the way, a viper on the road that bites the heel of a horse so that its rider falls backwards. I wait for your salvation, O Yahweh. What does that remind you of the imagery of? Go way back. The Garden of Eden. It bites, that's right. It bites the heel and he will bruise your head. That's the imagery that we should immediately be linking to. And it's interesting, it says, I wait for your salvation, O Yahweh. So Dan was the people of Dan were a messianic reference saying we wait for whoever it is spoken of in Judah to come. Does that make sense? Bandits shall attack Gad, but he shall attack their heels. Gad, by the way, settled to the eastern shore of the Jordan River, and it was easily attacked by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Mesopotamian culture. So they constantly, if you look through the annals and other things that you can read, Gad falls underneath quite a bit of warfare. Asher's food is delicious, and he shall provide from the king's delicacies. How about that for a blessing? You know, at least I get good food. Naphtali is a doe running free that puts forth beautiful words. That's kind of nice, you know. What?
Mine says beautiful fawns. A doe set free that bears beautiful fawns.
Fawns? The actual words is, if you look in the Lexham 21, doe running free that puts forth beautiful words. So that's interesting. That translation is different. I hadn't seen that before. Joseph is the bough of a fruitful vine, the bough of a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches climb over the wall. The archers fiercely attacked him. They shot arrows at him and were hostile to him, but his bow remained in a steady position, and his arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. What did he just describe? The attack of his brothers, and he maintained steadiness through that. Right? From there is the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Because of God, of your father, he will help you, and by Shaddai, he will bless you, and with the blessings of heaven above. Do y'all notice how long his blessing is? The blessings of your father are superior to the blessings of my ancestors, to the bounty of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the forehead of the prince of his brothers. And so once again, in parting words, good old Jacob lays a volley up for Joseph and makes him just the disdain of his brothers. You see that? Gad gets 2 sentences. Benjamin is a devouring wolf, devouring the prey in the morning and dividing the plunder in the evening. Benjamin was the weak one. Do you see the irony of that? But Benjamin was the favored son after Joseph of Jacob because of his mother Rachel. So let's keep going. 49 verse 28. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel that we know through history. And this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. Each according to his blessing, he blessed them. Now, I would dare say to you that he didn't bless each of them He just pronounced some judgment over some of them. Then he instructed them and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me among my ancestors in the cave that is in the field of Ephraim the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, that is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephraim the Hittite as a burial site, because that's where Abraham buried, remember, Sarah. They buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife, and there I buried Leah. The purchase of the field and the cave which was in it from the Hittites. Who is not buried there? Rachel. Isn't that interesting? I would have thought, if anything, Jacob would have said, take me to Rachel. So what might that say about the understanding of the afterlife? We don't have a direct link, but we see that there obviously is something that he doesn't view it as the Egyptians, and that's important here in just a minute, okay? And 33, when Jacob finished instructing his sons, he drew his feet up to the bed, so you can imagine him on a wood frame bed, logs tied together with a netting in between them, with some mattress of some sort that's been put together with hay or something else, and he pulls his feet up, the old man. Then he took his last breath, and the figurative speech is he was gathered to his people. He was dead. And so now what we see is Joseph is there with his brothers, and look what happened. It says, then Joseph, chapter 50, verse 1, then Joseph fell on the face of his father and wept upon him and kissed him. You just see him, oh, Daddy, Daddy, and he's just kissing him all over his face. You get that imagery. And Joseph instructed his servants, the physicians, to do what? Embalm his father. Now, is embalming a Hebrew thing at all? Not at all. Embalming is completely Egyptian. I want to share with you for just a few minutes. I've had an opportunity to study Egyptian embalming practices. People are like, do you really? Yes, I actually have. I've studied Egyptian embalming practices. We won't go into too much detail tonight because we just had dinner. But there's a 3-inch slit that is cut in the abdomen, which we remove the organs with the 3-inch slit, the primary organs, the liver, heart, all those kind of things, right? And then what we do is we take a rod, we shove it up the nose, and we break the cranial cavity to where we can then take essentially a hook, and we shove it up into the cranial area, and we spin it until we can grab the brain, and we pull the brain out through the nose. Okay? Yes, that's how they're tested for COVID. Yes, with a cotton swab. It's deep. So then the organs are then individually placed in small jars, because the small jars have to be entombed with the individual so that whenever they are resurrected and brought into the afterlife, they have their organs available to them. Then what happens is we fill the body with wine and with spices, and by filling the body with wine and spices, it then cures the internal, what's rest of it as it's bled out, and it essentially takes the body and does what we see inside, the mummies that we've seen on TVs. Is that enough? Huh?
Yeah, that was the cleaned up version.
That was cleaned up.
So what do they need these organs for if they're ripped out?
They can get them back. So, yeah, hey, it's really interesting. If you get a chance, there's a great, I don't know if you guys use it, but it's called The Great Courses online. And there's a great, that's where I learned about all this, is through studying Egyptian culture through The Great Courses. But it's a college level course on Egyptian culture. And if you're interested in Egyptian culture, it's a really good course to take. But it's a very long course. It's like over 600 pages. So check that out, The Great Courses, if you want to know about Egyptian embalming. Thank you. I think that's all we need, Chad. Let's move on. How about that veal? Verse 3. 40 days were required for them to do the embalming. For thus are the days, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. When the days of his weeping had passed, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, behold, I am about to die. In my tomb that I have hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there you must bury me. So then please let me go up and let me bury my father. Then I will return to you, Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father as he has made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt went up with Joseph to the land of Canaan, as we know it, with all of the household of Joseph, his brothers, and the household of his father. They left only their little children and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen, with some of the women, quite frankly, to take care of the children. Okay? Why don't we just send everybody to go bury Granddaddy Jacob? Because everybody might not come back. Got collateral. That's exactly right. We got the kids in Egypt. You're going to come back for the kids. Y'all ain't going to leave the kids. And all your flocks are in Egypt, so you're going to come back for all the flocks. And we're going to send a vestige of Pharaoh's household with you so that if anything silly goes on, or y'all try to stay or whatever, we'll make sure that the chariots that are there to guard you from the people that will attack you on the way are also the chariots that can lead you back. That's how the funeral procession would have went. Now, keep in mind, they're leaving from the land of Goshen, which is what we understand is the northern part of Egypt, where the Nile River and the Delta is, and they're crossing the land bridge over, coming up through the King's Highway, essentially, and then they would cut over into what we now see as modern-day Israel, the territory of modern-day Israel. So this is a long journey. This is not like an overnight trip. I mean, they're going for several days. They're traveling through the land of the Edomites, the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites. I mean, so there's a reason there's an armed guard. But what I find most interesting about this is that what he ended up doing was it shows us how much Joseph has become Egyptian. Does that make sense? Why? Joseph had no reason to embalm his daddy by his ancestral standards. Joseph obviously knew.
He kind of did because he knew he had to take a long journey.
Okay, so that's a great comment. But the reason that wouldn't have happened is because based on Jewish tradition, the body would have decayed. And once the body would have decayed, we would have collected the bones in a sarcophagus, a bone box. And we would have put the bones in a bone box, and we would have taken those bones in that little bitty box, literally like the human bone structure can lay in a box like this. We would have taken that box then to wherever we were going to bury it. That would have been the Jewish way. That's right. That's right.
Weren't they also supposed to be buried that night?
Yes.
They died
We see that in later Hebrew culture, not because we're not at the Levitical commands yet, right? We are way before Exodus at this point. But I think the other thing that's interesting for us to think about for a moment is that they're leaving Egypt. You catch that picture? When's the next time the Hebrews leave Egypt? At the Exodus, through the Red Sea crossing. And so that's interesting to think about for a minute, that they've left Egypt before, but they left Egypt. Remember, they went to Egypt, then they came back from Egypt. Now they've gone back. Remember, Abraham went to Egypt, right? Why did Abraham go to Egypt? For food. Y'all remember that? We studied that together. Abraham went to Egypt many, many years before now, and now they've come back to Egypt again, and now they're leaving Egypt again, but they've got an armed guard of the Egyptians traveling with them. And then 400 years from now, they're going to leave Egypt again. And this time when they leave Egypt 400 years from now, they're going to leave with all the treasures of Egypt at their disposal as they leave. And who chases them out of Egypt? The armed guards, the chariots. The imagery there is just like magnificent to think about over and over again. We see through history this playing out. Today, if you think about Israeli culture and you think about what goes on there, it's not a place you want to go. Egypt is not looked nicely upon. We don't go get horses from Egypt. Solomon messed up really badly because he went and got horses from Egypt in the Bible. Messed up really bad, was not supposed to be doing that. He ended up having Cleopatra, and all the things that went on there. It's just not a good thing. We see Egypt from this point forward in the Hebrew culture not be a place that is associated with privilege from that standpoint.
15 minutes.
Do what?
Yeah,
15 minutes, thank you, sorry. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of the household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt went up with him. Verse 8, with all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his household of his father, they left their little children. Verse 9, and there also went up with him chariots and horsemen. The company was very great. And when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, we don't know where that's at, by the way. It's not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. We have no historical reference, no archaeological findings associated with it that we're aware of, which was beyond the Jordan. They lamented, there was a very great sorrowful wailing. And he made a mourning ceremony for his father 7 days there. So 70 days in Egypt, now another 7 days at Atad, however long it took them to get there. And when the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, saw the mourning ceremony at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a severe mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore its name was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did to him just as he had instructed them. And his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which field Abraham had bought as a burial site from Ephraim the Hittite before Mamre. Hold on. Why do we say that multiple times? Why is that important?
The literary structure thing?
It is part of the literary structure thing. It's also important because it's the identification of the land belonging to the Israelite people. Over and over. It's a marking. We had a surveyor out at the house, and he puts pins in the grounds, and that's where the survey corner is. How do we survey corners in the Bible? In this land, at this place, at this tomb that you know about, this is where we are. This is ours. And after burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. So everybody comes back home to Egypt. I say home. Verse 15, and when the brothers of Joseph saw their father was dead, they got really concerned. Joseph's going to get mad at us and take it out on us. And it may be that Joseph will hold a grudge against us and pay us back dearly for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent word to Joseph. So they've gone back to the land of Goshen. Joseph has gone back to the governmental palace and to his home. And they send a messenger to him. And they say, your father commanded us before his death, saying, thus you must say to Joseph, oh, please now forgive their transgressions of your brothers and their sins, for they did evil to you. Do we know that he ever said that? We don't ever know for sure that that was said. I would proffer to you that that was never said by Jacob. That most likely,
He would have said that to him on his deathbed.
it seems like he would have said that in front of all the other brothers in the presence of Joseph. He would have said, now, Joseph, don't you hurt your brothers. Okay? Anyway, so now, please forgive the transgression. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. They just don't understand that I've forgiven them. I'm not mad at them anymore. Then his brothers went also and fell before him and said, behold, we are your servants. Then Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for I am in the place of... Huh? What did he just say?
Mine's just for am I? Yeah, mine's a question. Am I in the place of God?
As for you, you planned evil against me, but God planned it for good. He reiterates again to him. He says, God, what you planned for evil in my life, God planned so that we would be able to survive as a people. And in order to do this, to keep many people alive as it is today. So then, do not be afraid. I myself will provide for you and your little ones. And he consoled them and spoke kindly to them. They offered themselves as servants for what reason? They were scared of him for what he did. But what do we also know people offered themselves as servants for so that they could get what from Egypt? Food. Food. So they, his own people now, are selling themselves into slavery to Egypt for food. And Joseph, you say, well, Chad, how do you know that? Well, he just said right there, he just said, I'll provide for you and your little ones. Don't worry about it. We're your servants. We're indebted to you. We would say indebted, and we would think of it not at the level that they're talking about. They're talking about literally, my life is indebted to you. I am your servant from this point forward. I am your slave. So Joseph, verse 22, so Joseph remained in Egypt, he and the house of his father, and Joseph lived 110 years. Now, do what?
He was young.
Yeah, he was young. It is most likely, the 110-year mark is actually a very common Egyptian phrase of long life. So the question is, did he really live 110 years? We're not sure. But this is an Egyptian kind of view of that. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. Moreover, the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on the knees of Joseph. Y'all remember when we talked about born on the knees of? It meant that he got to hold his grandbabies. He laid them in between his knees as he sat down. That's the imagery that we're supposed to get from that. And Joseph said to his brothers, he draws his brothers in, I am about to die, but God will certainly visit you and bring you up from this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob our father. But how long would it take? 400 years. They're not going to see it. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall bring my bones up from here. So Joseph died. Hold on. When does God visit them? Think about that for a second. When does God visit them? Huh? Actually, it is Moses, but we see the death angel that God visits them and he sets them free at that moment. Do you see that? God visits the children of Israel in Egypt by the death angel 400 years from this time. And then if we were to trace and go straight into Exodus, we would see that they actually take his bones. His bones are kept, and they're kept in a box, essentially, and they take him out. And that's what's interesting, too, is that Joseph's bones are put in a box, essentially, is the imagery that we get in Exodus, where he had his daddy embalmed. I don't. Do what? Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Forgive me. But they take his bones is what it says in Exodus. That's my fault. So Joseph died. Verse 26, being 110 years old. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. They take his bones from there in Exodus. And we end Genesis.
Joseph, he was not old.
No, sir.
So the rest of his brothers lived?
No. No, the ancestors, and they kept that for some reason. Now, keep in mind, that's right. This wish was passed down. But what we know is in the book of Exodus that it talks about that that Pharaoh changes. Obviously, over 400 years, Pharaoh changes. But the Pharaoh, whatever generation, forgets the goose that laid the golden egg, and there's no more famine. And that's where we see the whole Hebrew enslavement begin from that standpoint.
Is Joseph Egyptian or Hebrew? I mean, he goes back and forth.
Yeah.
Sort of on the fence.
It is.
He keeps some of his Hebrew traditions, but he also practices some of the Egyptian.
Yeah, he does. Kelly was saying that he practices both Egyptian and Hebrew kind of religious practices.
Basically, he was raised there.
Yeah, he was.
He was raised in Egypt, so
Yeah.
kind of took that on. But I just,
And yeah, right. So I'm interested. 20 weeks we went through Genesis. As you survey Genesis, and as you now have all of Genesis in your mind, I hope, what do you think about Genesis? What strikes you so differently about Genesis now than whenever you started and you had just gone through Genesis as you had been brought through normal Genesis? What's interesting to you? What was different? What stands out to you? And it's like that was like really different.
With me, Genesis was always just about Adam and Eve, and them eating the forbidden fruit.
Yes.
That's pretty much all Genesis was to me.
Yes.
That, and of course what we talked about a lot is Joseph, and of course we had many colors.
Yes.
I mean, that's about as
He
far
was
as,
a good boy.
And he was a good boy.
that's right.
Jacob, what struck you different about Jacob possibly in this Bible study compared to what you have thought about Jacob before this Bible study?
How deceptive he was.
Yes, the deceptive nature, selfish. That struck me as I studied Genesis at this level. I was like, I never had realized that. That's really messed up.
This takes place over a really long period of time,
Yes.
but they don't learn. Like, they don't figure it out. I mean, I think I could be just as guilty
Yeah.
of that. But I mean, you'd think that they have this long history and somebody would go, man, this started back in 1-1.
Right.
You know, like this is, and they just don't.
Yeah.
We're still kind of in the same boat. We're still doing the same things over and over.
Over and
not
over.
Figuring it out.
Yeah,
In a lot of communities.
it's true. It's true. Anything else that stands out? Just, no.
The blessings and the curses,
Okay.
kind of, I don't know.
Have you never, Landy, does that strike you, the blessings and curses, because you've never noticed that in the Bible, or because you don't, what is it that?
Like, why are they the ones that are able to give the blessing?
Oh, okay, okay. So why is the Father able to do that? It is really, because he's deity. No, it is really, if you look even to the time of today, fathers should be blessing their children. It's almost handed down. It's like a human, it's something that we see all throughout. Oftentimes whenever I have the privilege of being able to preach in a church, I bless the church before we leave at the end of the service. I speak a blessing over the people. It's just one of those things you just, I don't know, it's this idea of that God is temporarily giving me as the father the opportunity to speak and to offer not only encouragement, but also a blessing to his people. And that's, for me personally, that's how I view the privilege of that, is that it's like, hey, this is my opportunity. But what do we see Jacob do with that opportunity? Yeah, the quote, blessing is not always good, right?
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, and curses. Yes, very much so. Very much so.
The other thing I see is that God is just so faithful when these people just keep messing
Yeah.
up, and he just keeps, I'm thankful for that part of it.
Yes.
Because he doesn't, I mean, his word was, I'm going to bless you, I'll make you a great nation. And
Yes.
you keep going down the wrong path, but I'm going to bring you back, and I promise to bless you, so I will.
Yes. That I think, whenever you, and the very last thing that you said, Kelly, that strikes me there, God said, I promise to bless you, and I am going to. Why did God preserve the life over and over again of the lineage of Jacob to the point that he did, when he could have smoked every one of them because of what they had done? Right? I mean, there were so many. He knew that it was leading to Jesus. He had to get us, Yahweh had to get the Messiah. That's the scarlet thread we're tracing, and it had to come through that lineage. And I mean, we see it through history in that way. So that's wonderful to me that we see that. Anything else? All right. Next week, Wyatt, you can go off. Next week, we do salvation and born again. And that is, I'm telling you, if you